We have Congressman Chris Stewart on with us. Hello, Chris. Always good to have you on.
Good morning, Glenn Beck.
You are, of course, a national award-winning author. You're really good. I tried to hire you as a writer, and then you're like, no, I think I should go to Congress. What a mistake that was. You're a world record Air Force pilot. You are a former owner and CEO of a small business, and now you're in Congress, and I'm sorry for that. Chris, you are on all kinds of committees, and I've got all kinds of questions. So let me start with the latest. Did you read the Washington Post today?
Not yet this morning. What did I miss?
So they say that, well, they have one source, and it's a kid, but they did talk to his mom before they put him on record. A kid says that he knows who the leaker is. He was a guy in this group of about a dozen kids, and he worked on a military base and would go in and just leak these documents to the kids. I find that a little strange, but I wanted to ask you because he worked on a military base, and he said he had access to documents and servers that he could get in and see all these secrets. How hard is that with the documents that you know and I know have come out? How hard what kind of classification would you have to have? And do we have those kinds of skiffs on military bases that would allow access to anything?
Yeah, well, a couple things, Glenn, if I could. Number one is you said, did I read the Washington Post this morning? I got to tell you, I don't read the Washington Post most mornings because they're not a trusted, not a trusted source of information. So, let's at least consider that.
Yeah.
But the other thing, too, is that I think there's probably two elements of this that are worth commenting on. Number one is that most of the stuff that we've seen, in fact, all of it, is classified top secret, which is actually one of the lowest classifications. So there's thousands of people who probably had access to a lot of these documents.
Okay.
And the second thing, Glenn, is that the whole presumption of the classification, number one is we overclassify a lot of things, and that's another topic. But some of these things, if you read them, you think, well, that doesn't seem terribly classified and seems actually fairly obvious. And I think that's the case with some of these documents, although not all of them. But my point is that the whole process only works if there's a presumption of trust. And, of course, there's some people that you can trust and you shouldn't trust, but it seems to me like there was a breakdown more broadly, and that is someone somewhere had enormous access and over a long period of time, and it seems like with just extraordinary ease was able to have access to these documents and then walk out of the building with them. They didn't break down through computers and get electronic access. It looks like they had physical access things and actually were walking around with them. That is actually quite surprising to me.
So we're seeing now with China, some of the leaks are about China and us not being able to have war with them. The Taiwan thing, where are we headed on that? Is China... I mean, if I were China with this president and this Pentagon, man, I would, if it looks like somebody else is going to win the White House, man, I would make my moves right now on Taiwan.
Well,
can they?
Yeah. Well, they're close to that. They're not quite where they want to be militarily, but military isn't the only consideration that they have. One of the primary considerations, of course, is what you just indicated. What do they estimate the United States will do? What do they estimate the response of the leadership and the President of the United States would be? And it's very, very clear. And everyone talks about Afghanistan, but you really just can't overemphasize the importance of that, Glenn. I mean, as I've traveled around the world since then, I hear it all the time. And not just from our friends, but from our adversaries as well. I mean, they look at that and they just go think what fickle, naive, weak leadership that was. And by the way, it's not just President Biden. It's General Milley. It's General Austin.
Oh, I know.
They're the ones who presided over that.
I know.
And so there's no question that President Xi looks at that and goes, well, maybe now is the time. And if I could share one personal experience I had, I was on another interview and they asked me, well, what's the timeline? I said, well, it's hard to say. The analysts, of course, predicting the future. But I said, I think it's probably 4 to 6 years. And that weekend I was called by the former National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien, a friend of mine. And he said, no, Chris, I think it's probably closer to 2 years. And then an hour later, I got a phone call from another very, very senior military officer who called me and said, Chris, I think you're wrong. I think it's closer to 2 years. Having been in the region recently, this much is very, very clear. China is preparing for war against the United States in over Taiwan in the South China Sea. They're preparing urgently, and I don't think the timeline is a decade for sure. It's probably not 5 years. It probably is sometime between now and the next election.
What does that mean for us, Chris? What does a world with the United States at war with China and most likely with Russia, what does that look like?
Yeah, and that really is a key question. What does that mean to us? I was in Ukraine last week and left there. Well, it was an interesting trip, I'll tell you that, Glenn. But one of the impressions I left there with was, to those of us here in the United States who we've sent them, as you and I have talked about, perhaps more than $100 billion. But most Americans, they may say, okay, well, we want to support that. It's a lot of money. But as far as it affects how we live day to day, it does not. I mean, we're completely unaware of it. Now, President Biden will blame the price of fuel on the war in Ukraine, but that's nonsense. That's not the reason for that. It's because of his own policies. But when and if there is a war in over Taiwan, every single one of us will feel it every single day. And I'll give you one illustration. There's recent analysis that said we would have a 9% reduction in our GDP the first year from the inability to access the chips and especially the exquisite chips. 9%. The Great Depression reduction in GDP the first year was 7.5%.
Oh my gosh.
And Glenn, that doesn't count because we haven't yet finished the analysis on the reduction in GDP from the fact that you're not going to have container ships leaving China and coming to the United States or coming to the West. We're just simply not going to continue to trade with them. So when you ask, what does it mean? I mean, the economic consequences of this are hard for us to imagine.
Chris, why are we not having these conversations? Why is it? It just seems like everything just happens. They just continue on with their, I think, diabolical plans, and nothing happens. I mean, Merrick Garland, I know you're on the weaponization committee. Merrick Garland has lied to the committee about who they're surveilling and who they're trying to rope in as FBI informants. He said, we're not doing this with Catholics. We're not targeting. And now we find out that, they are targeting Catholics. And he's not going to pay a price. When does someone pay a price for any of this stuff?
Yeah, Glenn, I've been asking myself that question for 6 years. Because you go back to the initial Russian hoax and the fact that Director Comey lied to Congress again and again and again. And then listen, when he was finally put under oath under deposition, you may remember something like 257 times he says, I don't remember. No, that's nonsense. Of course he remembers. I mean, that's a non-responsive witness. If that would have been anyone else, they would have been charged with perjury for saying that. What about McCabe? What about Lisa Strzok? What about, or Peter Strzok? I mean, you go down the list, it just keeps going. And all the time we were asking, where is the accountability? Now, there is some good news, and I don't want to be Pollyannish about this, but it is actually, I think, a positive step forward, and that is we have to reauthorize 702 and FISA this fall, and we're simply not going to do it. And as strong as an advocate as I am for national security, as someone who understands the value of intelligence, I would rather lose the tool then have the tool continue to be weaponized and continue to be used against the American people.
Oh, my gosh,
there's
Chris.
a number of us in Congress who are saying we simply won't reauthorize this unless there's enormous reforms put in place first. And it's one of the primary things we're concentrating right now on the Intelligence Committee.
Oh, man, I hope you guys stand firm on that. And I mean, it would have to be enormous reforms because that whole thing is a cesspool. And with these leaks, the story out today is that Biden is looking again at different ways he can monitor and capture all of the information on the web and surveil. I mean, we know what they're doing against the United States, the people of the United States.
Two thoughts, Glenn, if I could. Number one is you may know that we subpoenaed, the director and others yesterday on the Weaponization Committee regarding this absurdity of targeting Catholic dioceses, Catholic congregations. I mean, show me any reasonable person in the country who thinks that one of the threats to our security are believing Catholics, for heaven's sakes. It's beyond absurd. And that's good. I mean, we need to bring them in under oath once again and have an ability to question them. But the second point, Glenn, that you bring up is this. You know, the United States government has extraordinary powers to surveil by themselves, but they also have brought in the entire industry around them.
Yes.
Facebook, Twitter, et cetera, as a partner. And if, for example, it's illegal for the United States to assassinate someone, they can't target a foreign leader, for example, and tell the CIA, go and assassinate that person. That's illegal. They can't do it. But if they hired someone to do that, and they did it for them, it would be exactly the same thing. And it would still be illegal. And that's what the government has done essentially with surveillance and with suppression of free speech, with the weaponization of many of these tools. Is they don't do it themselves. They go to these tech companies and say, we want you to do it for us. And we're going to compel you. We're going to intimidate you. We're going to threaten you. Now, they don't have to threaten them very often or very hard because it turns out these tech companies are more than willing to do this for the United States government. But the fact that they work with a partner is still offensive and wrong as much as if they had done it themselves. And once again, it's one of the things that we're trying to address and trying to expose.
So one more question. I've only got about 90 seconds max on this, but tell me, are we standing firm on Congress bringing back the power of the purse? Are we going to fold again?
Yeah, we'll see, Glenn. I mean, you've got the Republican House, and many of us are saying that is the only tool that we have. And in fact, it is the only tool that we really have. And that is to say, we're just not going to fund you. But we don't control the Senate. So the House is going to push a lot of these things. For example, I'm not going to give a penny to the new FBI headquarters until Christopher Wray comes in and answers a boatload of questions. And
under oath in a way where he has to go to jail. You just said Comey answered, I don't remember when he was under oath. Well, he was under oath in Congress, but nobody cares. Nobody cares about that oath, it seems.
Yeah, it does. It seems like that's something different. But back to the original question, Glenn, is the House is going to defund some of these efforts, and I think we're going to be broad and deep in some of those. But of course, then that budget goes to the Senate, and we'll see what Schumer does. Because you know what he'll do, and he won't, and that's where the fight is going to take place. And we won't know the answer to that until sometime this summer or this fall, when we actually have to fund the government, and we'll see how strong the Republicans will stand.
Chris, thank you very much. I can't imagine being any of you guys who are trying to do your best in Washington. I just can't imagine the frustration. Well, but thank you.
Glenn, I should have taken a job and come and worked with you, right?
I know you should have. Huge mistake. I told you. All right, Chris, thank you so much.